Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Every moment is sacred, where we interweave meditation and healing into everyday life. I am your host, Rain Elizabeth Stickney. Now, let us begin. Every moment is sacred, is offered freely, and your support truly makes a difference. To make a contribution, go to patreon.com/RainElizabeth. You may also contribute and become part of the community through my website at rainelizabeth.org. Hey, I am so glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Today, we have a wonderfully insightful conversation with Sara Kostelnik. She is an interior designer. She is a mother and a wife. She is a wonderful, beautiful, wise person. She owns her own business, Jade Scott Design. She's very talented in the realm of feng shui and creating safe spaces in the home that are essential to well-being. Sara also has a story to share. She has a story to share about her own life growing up with a narcissistic parent. I feel so touched and so honored to have this healing conversation with Sara and to be able to share it with you. Stories of childhood trauma are very dear and near to my heart, as I also grew up with significant childhood wounds and trauma. So when someone reaches out to me or I have the opportunity to connect with someone around such a vulnerable topic as how one was raised and offering some insights about the healing and growth, about moving through difficulty with grace and ease and the twists and turns any human life goes through, I just feel so vulnerably touched, honored, and the deepest respect blooms within me. So I invite you to bloom your beautiful hearts with respect and your own honesty and vulnerability about whatever journey you've had in your world so far, or perhaps allowing this conversation to touch on some understanding about anyone else in your life who might have had an interesting growing up story that gave them something significant to overcome when they were ready. Sara offers compassion not only for herself, but for all of her family members. And I'm so deeply excited to share this empathetic, conscious, loving conversation with you about growing up with a narcissistic parent. We jump right into the conversation, so take a deep breath, and here we go.
I think a lot of people who have had childhood trauma, there's not like a great recollection of childhood. So it's kind of hard to start there. So maybe we can work backwards in a sense, or maybe I'll even start with, the family dynamics and the roles. So there's me. I have a younger brother who we're 7 years apart. And then my two parents, they married young. They were actually married in their senior year of high school because they got pregnant with me. So from inception, I was unplanned, right? So you can probably already guess where I'm kind of going with that a little bit. My parents have always assured me that even though I was unplanned, I was wanted, right? But when you grow up thinking you're not, regardless of what they say, it sticks with you for a really long time. And then when you, 40 years later, have this awareness that I really was just like kind of used, like, and wasn't given like an opportunity to be a child, like you find with a narcissist that you are kind of there as an extension of them, that your needs aren't really important, that your reality needs to mirror theirs. So, I mean, that's just like tip of the iceberg, essentially. But from a role perspective, I was the oldest. Again, my brother is 7 years apart. And I was more of the rebellious one. And I didn't really play that role until probably like middle school. So, like preteens, when there's a lot of angst, really trying to find your independence. Living with a narcissist does not like that, right? Like, how dare you? Which is, probably a really famous line I've heard growing up. And my brother was more of the peacemaker. He was a very quiet kid, shy kid. Looking back on his childhood now, I can see why. Like, he never wanted to ruffle any feathers. He saw how my dad spoke to me and knew that he wanted no parts of that. And my mother's role, so obviously you can tell my father is who I'm speaking about as playing the narcissist role. But my mother, she grew up with a narcissist. Her mother was
Mm.
extremely narcissistic and mentally, emotionally abusive to all of her children. So my mother was raised by one and then married one. And I think she was emotionally cut off really early on. And so there was it's almost like she didn't protect me, or at least that was my reality, was that I never felt like she protected me. But now that I have all of this awareness around what's going on, I realize like she didn't have the capacity to. She was not raised to, self-soothe and understand what was happening. And then she just married right into it in high school, like had a baby and now had to be a mother on her own. Like, so I have a lot of compassion for my mother, although growing up, I didn't. Her and I were actually the ones that butted head the most,
Mm.
because if the attention was on my mother and I, then it was like my dad could come in and save the day. He could be the like cool dad who always said yes, and here's a couple
Mhm.
bucks, go walk to the ice cream shop, because they do that. They have this like way of luring you in when it's convenient for them. And that's the tricky part that I think I realized later on in life, was I started struggling with like how much of that side of him was authentic and how much
Mm.
of it was just like playing around in his game or his reality. And so I had to like process a lot of that, because it's not all bad memories, but are the good ones like authentic and truly
Mm.
loving? Like, so I had to kind of work through a lot of that too. So those are kind of the roles as far as where we all stood. And I
Mm.
witnessed a lot of times, my dad would, treat my mother like you weren't allowed to really have your own voice, your own opinion. It was his way. It was, and that was in not just family dynamics and those types of things, but it just in general, when it came to politics or social events or current events, things in the news or the media, it was, if you thought differently than him, you were crazy, you were delusional, your reality's skewed. Like, and I remember having memories of that as a child, thinking, oh, that doesn't sound right, or realizing there was no resonance in that for me, but I played along, it was just easier. He had a lot of anger issues. Well, still does. Well, actually, I think he's calmed in his age, but still struggles with anger. Drop one thing on the floor and it's like explosive. So there was a lot of walking on eggshells
Mm.
as a child, things like that. There was never, I don't want to say there was never physical abuse, but it was
Mm.
mostly mental and emotional, just
Mhm.
completely invalidating your feelings. If you really needed anything, it was you were more of just being a pain, a thorn in their
Mhm.
side type of thing. So the interesting part is, and I know the word narcissism is like really tossed around these days. And I think it's probably a good thing, because I think so many of us have struggled not realizing what we're dealing with,
Mhm.
and just trying to raise ourselves. And not, so many people I think live with a lack of self-confidence and self-awareness there as adults, and I think that I truly believe that as humans, we kind of come collectively to help each other out. And so I think there's just this huge awareness around it. But at the time, I'd say probably 3 years ago, I started working with an intuition coach. And we really started honing our intuition and just starting to listen to it more. And that was a huge way for me to get back to a trusting of myself. But this is before I was
Mm.
even aware of what was going on with my father. And so I was developing, my intuition, and I was laying in bed one night and I was tossing, turning, sleeping, not able to fall asleep. And the word narcissist or narcissism popped in my head. And I decided to follow that because what I knew was intuition speaks to you is like a drop in, right? First thought, best thought. And
Mm.
I decided to go down the Google rabbit hole, we'll call it. And I was in shock, literally in shock, because my perception of a narcissist personality was, I don't know if you've ever read the Christian Grey books, the 50 Shades of Grey. They were really popular maybe
Oh,
like 10 years ago.
I've heard of
Christian
them.
Grey,
Mhm.
right? Like wealthy, good looking, arrogant, pompous, has it all, right? That is what I pictured a narcissist person to be. And honestly, I never knew that a female could exhibit those traits. Maybe in a way, but I always kind of associated to being a male. And when I went down that Google rabbit hole, my dad checked like every single box. And I never knew this about narcissism.
Mm.
And I remember just like kind of dropping my head in my hands and just started sobbing. And it was like I was sobbing like tears of relief. Like, I'm not crazy. Like, this is him. Like, this is his doing. Like, it was it was maddening for so long that there was just such this sense of relief. And that was about a year and a half ago. So my like awakening to this really is rather recent. And that's where I've kind of been. And I've been obsessed with researching it, understanding it. And I finally feel like I'm at a space now where I can, I've, it's funny with these relationships, especially being your parents. Like, I feel like I've gone through these stages of grief with my now alive, still alive parents. And
Mhm.
that's been challenging because to date, I don't really have much contact with them, which is tough when you have two kids and they're young, both under 10, and they don't really understand, what's happening. They understand very small bits, but that's kind of where I am. So it's like I'm still healing. I've had my awakening to it. I have an understanding. I've accepted it. And I have really good days where I feel really powerful and I'm like, no, I've put up these boundaries. And for anyone listening, you never use the word boundaries with a narcissist because they will rip you to shreds, right? Because they don't like that. They don't like those, human psyche words. They're not allowed. They're not relevant to them.
Mm.
So, but then I also have days where I'm just sad. I'm sad. I'm grieving the loss of my parents, grieving who I always wanted them to be. And I know they'll never be
Mm.
that. But I think doing this, like talking about it, sharing stories, that's probably the biggest reason why I wanted to share, because that's been helpful for me, is listening to other people's stories, following, mental health experts and just hearing them talk about it so that it's just more validation. Because
Mhm.
if there's anything we need, it's like a return to self, like trusting yourself, loving yourself, understanding that like what you didn't get, you can give to yourself now,
Mhm.
or through your kids if you're raising children. So, I'm happy to kind of dig deeper. I know that was kind of a big gamut of like childhood to now, but yeah, it's all a process and I'm still processing it. So,
I'm so glad and I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story, Sarah. And I'm drawn right in and I see you in that family as a child and I see you growing into the woman that you are and having this intuition awakening and the support with your intuitive healer. And I love that you are coming back to yourself. And for me, I know that there can be a continual coming back to oneself. That is true for me. How is it for you? Is it a coming back to yourself and now you're here, or is it a continuing process, or what is your sense of selfhood these days?
It's definitely a continuing, because there are times where I feel unstoppable, and it depends on who I surround myself with. That's been a huge thing. I mean, not only with the letting go of my parents and the relationship that we had, I've had to do that with several like friends and other relationships. And, I think that that's also part of a bigger journey. But part of me is like, am I letting them go because they're not healthy relationships? Or do they represent something familiar from a relationship with my parents? Right.
Mm,
So that part has been hard. And how I show up now is challenging. Especially things like social media, which I know a lot of people struggle with social media in general, because a lot of people lack, self-confidence and putting themselves out there on camera. And being a business owner, that's how we market ourselves today, is putting ourselves out there. I mean, that's just the way of the world. So I do struggle with that a lot. And I think it's, meeting people like yourself, and other people in, some of the similar groups that we are in, just constantly seeking other people to like cheer you on, right? Because you never really had that cheerleader in your life. I'll notice when I'm having a teaching moment with the kids, or they're having an emotional moment. And at first, I would, when they were really young, I struggled with how to deal with that. But now, knowing what I know, like I'm able to be present with them and allow them to self-soothe and regulate their emotions in the way that like they need to, so that they can grow up to be like emotionally healthy adults. So I find my courage and my strength when I have to kind of go in business mode or mom mode. But when I'm sitting with myself, like there are still really sad moments. And I've come to appreciate them. I study like the mind body. For me, being in interiors and feng shui, my thing is mind body home, and creating space, safe space in my home for me to have those moments, to let it to cry it out, not keep it in, because if I cry it out, if I hold it in, it's going to stick in my body somewhere. And those are other things. I've had a lot of body things I've had to work through. Interestingly, my hips,
mm,
which deal with the root and your safety, and the hips represent a lot of father energy, which I find fascinating. So there's
mhm.
still things to be released out of that. I don't think I could be where I am and have the perspective I have if I didn't have like some grounded spiritual energy surrounding me. I think that's been my biggest support system, is having some sort of faith. And I think just having the business outlet, sharing with others, helping others, and raising my children has been the big factors in part of my healing. So, but yeah,
Mm.
it's definitely a work in progress. It's not like I'm all powerful. I still go back and want to crawl inside a shell sometimes, for sure.
Oh. Well, right away in contact with you, I have noticed not just today, but in times before, I've noticed your vulnerability. And I mentioned courage earlier when we were talking today, but not to overuse that word. It's for me, receiving you, I feel this willingness of being honest and vulnerable in a very powerful way. And for me,
Mm,
that lands as courageous. And I admire that in
mm,
you. And as you're talking about root and grounding and raising your children consciously and being aware of releasing father energy and hips and having faith, I continue to feel this wealth of, if we were to use a different word from power and courage, for me, it would be strength, this wealth of strength.
mm. Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that, because that's really what I'm striving for. I want to be seen as this driving force and powerful, like, look what I've overcome. But it's not like, not in an egoic way, like, you know
Mhm.
what I mean, more like it can be done, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And, you know, some people might look at abuse from a physical perspective and say, well, you weren't beat or abused in that manner. And some people might think that's worse. Necessarily, you know, abuse is abuse, period,
Mhm. Mhm.
in whatever way you want to look at it. And everybody has a story in some manner. And I think that, yeah, just like I said, it's not an egoic, I want to be powerful and strong and
Mhm.
courageous. It's just I want to show others that like you can overcome it, and that if you've if you've dealt with being raised by a parent that exhibits this sort of personality, like it like your feelings are validated, but you can overcome it. And I think step one is having awareness. And I think that's really step one in any situation that we're trying to
Mhm.
overcome is
Mhm.
if you have some awareness around it, then you can start working towards whatever it is you want to change about it. So, yeah, I like
So
that though. I kind of have this vision of when you were saying that, like me roaring like a tiger, kind of.
yes, I hear your roar and I love it. Bringing awareness to narcissism, what would you say the definition of narcissism is?
Uh, as you're asking that, I can picture that like checklist that I had found. I think that in its simplest framework, I think a narcissist is someone who lacks empathy, period. To elaborate on the definition, I think that they, well, one, I want to also say, and again, I'm not a mental health expert or a psychotherapist in any way, but from my research, what I've learned is it's not something they actually can be diagnosed with. It's a personality trait, just as, you know, someone could exhibit a sad personality or a joyful one, you
Mhm.
know, or so it's just a personality that you're dealing with. Now, there's definitely a spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Because in some ways we all, you know, if you have an ego, you can, you know, be narcissistic at times, right? But I think understanding that I feel like it's such a big topic. It's hard to condense into a definition. One, they lack empathy. Two, their reality is very skewed. And what they do, though, is they project that onto you as your reality being skewed, right?
Mhm.
They gaslight a lot. You know, that's not true. It wasn't that way. A lot of them are lie. They will straight up lie to you to protect their sense of reality. And understanding that their reality is so skewed, it allows me to have a little bit of compassion and empathy for them. And that's how I know when my brother or my mother are like, you're just like your father. I'm not, like, because I actually exhibit empathy. And that to me is like definition number one. But, you know, they can be very antagonistic. They can, you know, be one-uppers, you know. So like in the very like minimal, they can do that. But when they're on the further end of the spectrum, you know, being raised by one for me just just not tending to like there's no emotional attachment. One thing I found really interesting in my research too is that they really don't, it's like they only need something from you when they need something from you. So if you, especially as a
Mhm.
child who has needs and, you know, look, and how dare you, I'm busy, you know, like kind of push you away, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm getting a little off topic, but
Mhm.
you know, just the empathy is really the biggest for me
Mhm.
from a definition standpoint.
Mhm. That's such an important part of the definition of narcissism as I understand it. And yes, I agree with you. As you're saying, it is the definition that really makes a difference. So when we're talking about narcissism and the lack of empathy, and you having been a child raised in an environment like that, and there are other children who are raised in environments like that, you've spoken a little bit about what it was like. And if you tune into that lack of empathy, do you get a body sense of what that was for you as a little girl learning and growing? How were you with a father, charming and sometimes saving the day, but also not having time for your needs and not really feeling into your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I confusion is what comes up, especially when they do that. They rein you in with their charm and then, have no use for you later that day. I spent a lot of time alone in my room because it was easier. Like I had mentioned earlier, there was a lot of walking on eggshells around them. Don't say the wrong thing, or you could just feel his energy if he was having an off day or if he was in the garage working on the car and he like dropped a hammer and then that would
Mm.
like upset him and it would like snowball into more like disasters happening, it's like law of attraction, not in a good way, right? And so I just remember, spending a lot of time in my rooms, really connected with like my stuffed animals. When I, as a teenager, never wanted to be home, I wanted to be out of that environment desperately. I knew as soon as I turned 18, I was leaving, and I did. I think like a week after my birthday, I was out. um, and the interesting thing was in my 20s is when I really connected, probably had the better, that was probably the better part of our relationship because there was distance. I was getting some freedom and they were too. They were getting freedom from having raised a child the last 18 years. Now, my brother was still there, but again, my brother was quiet, kept the peace. He was easy, right? So even though our relationship was really better, I guess is the best word I could use, I was filled with a lot of anxiety in my 20s. Now, I think people in their 20s are anxious anyways because you're like, okay, world, here I am. Now what?
Mhm,
Right?
mhm,
But having to kind of reprogram myself, knowing, well, not knowing that that's what
mhm,
was needed. I
mhm,
was turning to alcohol and I was a cigarette smoker for since I was 15. And so were my parents. So on that level, I connected with them and we had fun times. We drank, we hung
mm,
out, right? So there was this decade where there was a stronger bond than we had ever experienced. And it was finally like, oh wow, I must be doing something right now. Like my parents actually enjoy my company and, we're getting along. And there were times when I would be hanging out and I would recollect stories of, an abusive situation where I was like, oh, dad, I still can't believe that happened, just trying on some level to connect with him, completely unconscious that it was like a screwed up story that like I shouldn't be
mhm,
really enjoying telling, right? And then when I was 30, I had my first child, and that's when things changed. That's really when I started like waking up, right? And then I just turned 40 a few weeks ago, and I thought, okay, I'm not going into this decade carrying this. Like we are, we are like starting fresh, all new, fresh me. I'm stepping into my power. Like we're going to fix this. So
mhm,
it's kind of the progression through the decades. But as a child,
mhm,
yeah, just never really wanted to be around them,
mhm,
you
mhm,
know? And I've heard my whole life, things like, this has always been your fault. You have a track record of this. Like, and
mm,
that's referencing my rebellious teenage years, but it was only an acting out to the situation, right?
mhm, mhm,
One that someone who's a narcissist would never own. So for 40 years, just thinking everything was your fault and there's something wrong with you, right? You're too sensitive, you're too this, you're too that, you're a pain in the ass, all of it, right?
mhm,
So just leaving all that behind, because I know none of it's true
mhm,
now,
mhm.
you know, but
Good for
feeling it in my
you.
body, I mean, from an anxious standpoint, I would always feel things in my gut, that solar
Mhm,
plexus area, your point of power.
mhm,
I mean, that's where it would hit me when
mhm,
you asked that very early on and I kind of got a little away from it. But yeah, just that
mhm.
a loss of power.
And I hear the waking up that happened over the course of your life and coming to this knowing for sure, yes, I am going to live in my true authentic power. And none of that is
Hmm.
true. And I'm leaving it all behind. What
Yes.
grace. Yeah. What a conscious step.
And it feels relieving. 2 years ago, it would have felt scary.
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
now I'm at a point where like I'm ready to just be me.
Yeah,
So,
the world is lucky. The world is lucky for you to be
oh,
you.
thank you, Rain. You're
And
so
all
sweet.
the, oh, thank you. And all the way through too, I see that little girl who I hear enjoyed spending time alone. And I imagine that you as a little girl felt safe alone. Is that part of the story?
Oh, sure.
Mhm.
Sure. And it plays out still now. Like I very much like being home. I consider myself introverted. I would much rather be at home. I'm a homebody, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I felt safe. And I think my bedroom was my safe space. And it's so interesting that that's what I do for people now is creating safe, sacred space for people at home
Mhm.
because
Mm, mhm.
you have to get it from somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, if your sense of home is one part of your room, like have that place to go to, whether you want to call it an altar space or a meditation
Mhm.
space, you know, have it, have somewhere you can go.
What a beautiful tie-in. And
I know. I just tied that in like just now, Rain. I love it.
we you and I were talking earlier before that I grew up with an abusive parent as well, different story. But one of the similarities that I feel with you is that I spent a lot of time as a little girl arranging my objects. And I was very close with my stuffed animals as well. But there is something so miraculous about just taking my small amount of possessions and putting them just so, and then feeling that peace within and without. And so when I hear you about feng shui and designing spaces that heal and feel safe, I resonate with that, how precious that is to be able to create that space for yourself and then to share that gift with the world.
I love that. Arranging spaces creates a sense of order to what appears to be chaos, right?
Mhm.
And even if it is just rearranging objects in your room or setting your stuffies just so, you know, it's a sense of order where there's chaos, you know?
Mhm.
And I'm still like that now. It's sometimes borderline a little like compulsive, you know, the throw pillows on the couch, you know, I'm probably 3 times a day, you know, in there arranging, karate chopping so they have a nice fluff, you know, it's interesting that we're talking about it because I've never really had that awareness of probably why I'm like that. Like I'm very organized and things have to, you know, they have to be set up a certain way. So that's I love this moment we're sharing because it's kind of bringing some awareness to me as to again why I do the things I do, like where that stems
Mhm.
from. So that's beautiful. Thank you for pointing that out.
And I also hear that there was an awakening or maybe something in the mind that grew a bit more spacious around the birth of your first child, where you could start to see through this facade a little more clearly, the facade of your family of origin, the facade of the relationships that weren't really working. Is there some truth to that, like a mental clarity that happened for you?
Yeah, I think when my first child was born, I think I didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? And when he would cry, I struggled with what to do with them. I mean, I eventually learned like the whole, you know, swaddling and the shushing, you know, the 5 S's. I don't know if you're familiar with, but like, you know, I would practice these things and it would work. And what I remember hearing my whole upbringing was, oh my God, you never stopped crying. It was constant crying. We thought you were colic, but you weren't colic. You cried incessantly. And I heard that my whole life. And it brought me right back to that. I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is karma. Like, this is what I did, you know, as a child. I just cried nonstop. So maybe that's what my son's going to do, you know? And I had this like am I being punished? And it was like before I really understood what like true karma was, you know, and I'm like kind of blaming that situation, like blaming myself, like, oh, well, you were a pain in the ass when you were little, so you're gonna get a child that cries, you know. And then I just started, and then I would kind of, I can't explain it. I just started becoming conscious of these stories. Like it's just a story in my head, because it's what I've been taught. And so I feel like I just started paying attention to what was happening. And then as he kind of got into his toddler years and was a little bit more troublesome from, just getting into things, and my reaction was anger at first,
Mm.
and almost narcissistic tendencies, like, how dare you, like, I need to sleep, or I need to get this done, and you're over here causing a mess, and again, that feels so icky. Like, I don't like the way that feels. And I think it's really hard to put in words, because I think a lot of it was just so very subtle, but really part of the bigger picture that I was going through. Because initially, my whole journey, my awakening really started with my career, or so I
Mm.
thought. I had made a huge career change, and at the time was desiring a career change, and then had a kid. And that's the thing I have to keep remembering, is to give myself grace, because all of this is happening at the same time. Like, there's so much happening at once. It was like, had two kids, career change, you know, reliving my childhood traumas and working through those, and raising myself and making sure I'm still tending to my marriage. And it was it's crazy when you really sit back and think about how much we're going through every single day, especially when you're trying to work through some trauma. And Rain, I'm not working with a therapist. Like, I just never reached out to one. And when I listened to like Dr. Ramani talk about, who studied narcissism for 20 years, and she's like, if you had a parent, like, it's not good. You need a therapist. And I'm like, I don't have a therapist. And I think I've been relying on my intuition, that
Mm.
whole practice, and just really staying in touch with that side to kind of help guide me through this. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you actually sit down and think about it. Like, as we're talking, I'm like, wow, I am pretty strong and brave. Like, I don't give myself enough credit.
Yes, well, good. I'm glad that you can hear that in yourself and to recognize that you deserve and you're worth all of the credit in the world of this attunement that you've given to yourself. Just looking at your own parenting as your first child was growing up and being curious about, oh, this doesn't feel so great doing it this way. It takes
Mhm.
so much empathy for oneself to have that kind of attunement to one's child, and then to make a conscious decision of what could be better. What does my intuition tell me? That awareness is completely opposite to a narcissistic personality style, or wherever a person falls on the spectrum of narcissism. What you're describing is healthy.
Yeah. And another, just from a parenting perspective, there are, and I don't want to make any claim to be the perfect parent, or, I never get upset or yell at my kids. I mean, I'm still a human being, and it's going to happen, and it still does. There are definitely times that if it's not, raising my voice, maybe it's just something I said that 3 seconds later, I'm like, oh, that was kind of hurtful. Like, I probably shouldn't. It could have just been the tone of my voice, right? Sometimes
Mhm,
it's these very subtle reactions, or a look, that your
mhm,
parent might
mhm,
give you, or whatever. But the difference is, again, between someone who's narcissistic and empathetic, is the empath is going to turn around and apologize. Hey,
mhm,
I'm sorry. I I was wrong. That would
mhm,
never happen the other way around. And I was speaking with a mental health expert psychotherapist, and she said that there are studies now where just that apology, that moment that you can, like, that connection with your child, is going to trump what, like, your reaction,
mhm,
is being able to apologize and share with them, hey, like, I was wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. I just was having a bad reaction. I was in a different headspace at the moment. Like,
mhm,
it's not you. That was me.
mhm,
I own it. And, there's studies now showing that, like, just that 3-second apology and moment
mhm,
with your child is going to trump what happened. And it's almost like they can let it go, because they're
mhm,
not, like, feeling shamed and guilted into thinking like, oh, I did something wrong. I upset mom. And then they hold it in, they don't share it. And then they hold it in their body and then they grow
Mhm.
up with it over time, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, again, I don't claim to be perfect, just trying to
Mhm.
recognize myself in the moment and being
Mhm.
aware of it when I'm not right, you know?
Mhm.
And yeah, and it's not just about the apology, it's also a teaching moment that when they do that, because they're going to have their moments, you know, you've modeled to them how to repair it, you know, so
Mhm.
it's like working double duty.
That's right. And we get to be human together. And
Right.
what an asset to share with our children that they get to be human. We get to be human as
Yes.
mothers and parents. They get to be human. We're filled with humanity. Let's celebrate this. Yeah. So, when looking at narcissism and your experiences in your family of origin, all the way to this day, what would you say is a healing that has happened in relationship with your father, or something that you would like to happen that you imagine would be healing, or just reflecting on healing in the realm of narcissism? What is true for you?
I think I'm actually at a point where I'm kind of struggling with that. I'm struggling with what I want my relationship to look like. From my personal healing, I just want peace. And I think that's going to be an ongoing process. At the moment, I have very limited contact. I would say about every 4 or 6 months, I get a text. You know, it's usually not very nice. Haven't heard from you. Me and your mother are doing just fine. Not that you care. Just very
Mm,
like, and honestly, when I had put that offer out there to do some interviews on the topic, that's really what sparked it, was a text.
oh,
And I was very firm in my response. And it was very simple. And I have said this for the last year and a half to both my parents, that my door is always open, but you can only enter as long as it's met with love, kindness, and respect. And I have stood by that 100%. And I feel like it keeps falling on deaf ears for them because I still get, like I said, every 4 or 6 months, I get these texts like, you're wrong. I can't believe you're dumping us as parents, things like that. And, I have certainly tried, Rain, to explain my side, but to explain my side from my perspective is really difficult for someone in that position to hear because it
mhm,
just makes no sense to them.
mhm,
And again, I have this like higher spiritual perspective that they would never understand. They're just not there. They're not conscious enough. And I hate to say that. I don't want that to come out as I'm conscious and you're not, I'm better and you're not. Like, it's not like that.
mhm,
That's not what I mean. It's just, they would just never get it. You know what I mean? So my response to that last text is what sparked kind of I'm going to talk about this now because it feels like the next step, because I was so
mhm,
proud of myself. I said, I truly do love you. And I want nothing but peace for you. But this conversation is now closed. And
mm,
that's it. I never want to go backwards. I never want to talk about with them particularly. There's no family therapy for someone who's narcissistic. It's just not, they would never agree to something like that. So there's no reason to talk about it with them. I
mm,
can talk about
mhm,
it with my community or my friends, the people that are supportive of me, but with that person, there's no great way to move forward. And so that's where I'm struggling. I don't know how to move forward. Right now, for me, it's no contact
mhm,
because I'm not strong enough, right? To sit at Thanksgiving and deal with that without having a reaction,
mhm,
right? I know I'm not strong enough. I will probably react. And that's what I'm trying to
mm,
avoid because those are the parts of me that I'm trying to transcend, right?
mm,
So for right now, it's no contact. And I think about, what it could look like. I don't know. I think I want a relationship with them, but it would never look like what it ever looked like before. So there's so much unknown that I don't even know what a relationship would look like with them.
mhm.
the way we used to hang out, drinking and smoking, like that's not part of my life anymore at
Mm-hmm.
all. I
Mm-hmm.
don't do any of that. Like I quit drinking, which is crazy. I mean, right, I was smoking at the age 15. I was drinking, it wasn't an alcoholic per se, but every night I would have a couple glasses of wine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I have an addictive personality. So for me, that wasn't healthy. So I feel like I wouldn't even know how to really connect with them or relate to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I just want peace. And I hate saying this, but I feel good that with a lot of distance.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've grieved my alive parents. So I feel kind of okay with where things are. And there's
Mm-hmm.
there's there's some guilt in that. So it's like another thing that I have to like kind of work through is now the guilt and the shame of even saying that out loud. And fear of being judged for saying that, like, how dare you say that about your parents? Well, it's not like a lovey-dovey relationship, you know. And I think only people who are in those types of relationships would understand that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the hard part too, is I'm in this, I feel like the relationship between my mother and my brother, of course, they're caught in the middle. And because they are still in close contact, obviously my mother lives with him, she is also dealing with living with a narcissist, but she is completely unaware of it. She is at the point of, in my opinion, brainwashed. Like she will never crawl out of this. And I don't know if she will ever come to any sort of realization about what's going on. I don't know if maybe she eventually hears a podcast of hearing her daughter talk about it, that it would ever truly sink in. Because I have tried to explain my side, but it falls on deaf ears. They're not going to hear it. They're not going to absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my brother playing that peacemaker role, he doesn't want to hear it. Just, I'm staying out of it. You do you, dad does him. We'll just, for a while, there was a time where I just wanted them to hear my side. Like if they just heard my side, like they would get it.
Mm-hmm.
And, but the reality is they won't. And I think it really boils down to a choice. I don't think they choose to, because it's just easier, because if they don't want the situation to turn on them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was recently reading, I cannot remember the book because I tend to read like 10 books at the same time. But the history of a scapegoat, which I totally am, like black sheep, scapegoat, that's me. I mean, when are we gonna applaud the scapegoat? Okay. Like that's what I want to know, because we are strong. We carry so much weight, right? But I never knew like the biblical hit story of the scapegoat. Like they literally would bring in a goat to the town center the community would like come around the goat, and they would cast all their like negative decisions and desires and just anything that they felt like they needed to rid themselves of. They cast it on the goat. And then the goat would be taken and like walked wherever, into the fields or the desert or wherever they lived. And that's the story of a scapegoat. I mean, that was a very like condensed storyline, but
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and I was like, wow, that's so true. Like, because they can't look, like that's their biggest thing, is they're so walled off from their own emotional state that they can't even look at themselves. It's just a huge defensive wall.
Mm-hmm.
So any issue that's theirs, I'll put it on you. You were the one causing the trouble in the family. You have the track record. You did this. This is so
Mm-hmm.
like you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I had to like finally embrace that. Like, yeah, I am the scapegoat,
Mm-hmm.
and turn it into a strength more than a weakness, and just do my best to transcend it. Like I refuse to pass this on to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing the work. I'm doing the work,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm here for it. And I finally just kind of surrendered, and I said, look, if this is what I'm here to do, let's do it. Cause I'm not carrying this with me next lifetime. So yeah, I think, to get back to your question, like what do you see for the future? Like just peace and letting go,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
just keep surrendering to it. So it's tough work though.
And how is your heart in this tough work?
It's good.
Mhm.
I'm still learning to have a little more compassion for myself. I tend to give to everybody else more than myself. But I really had to recognize that my family, my husband, and my kids, I had this moment probably a year ago, where we were pulling oracle cards out of a
Mhm.
deck with like an intuition mastermind that I was part of. And we did it in like circle fashion. So whoever you pulled, you read for the person that was next in line. And the card was like these three little angels, like holding hands, and they were in a circle. And it was just real vibrant and stars, and it was a beautiful card. And my insight from that card that I drew was like, here I am looking for validation and love from a parent who doesn't know how to give it.
Mm. Mhm.
Not just a parent, both parents. But I have these three people in my life who are dancing around me, giving me all of their unconditional love, like unconditional. Like growing up, it was conditioned love. Now I have unconditional love. And I wasn't seeing it. I was too worried on fixing that. And so I try to live in this place of, not only am I not carrying this into the next life or this next decade, but like I'm creating a new life beyond, like generationally. Like, and it starts with me.
Mm.
Like I'm starting over,
Mhm.
and I'm carrying that through my heart,
I hear so
through my
much.
husband and my kids.
Uh-huh. Oh, what a beautiful family you have, your husband and your children. And I hear so much compassion. And I'm bearing witness to you taking this family legacy of narcissism and transforming it with compassion into a new family story, one where you're feeling unconditional love from your husband, from your children, and I imagine from yourself as well.
Yeah, you stated that beautifully. And I love hearing that that's what I'm doing. Like, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Mm.
It is beautiful. And I can't wait to see how it unfolds. And I'm okay. Like you said, I'm acknowledging this trauma from my childhood with compassion. I'm not here talking about this to get back at my parents for not raising me the way I wanted to be, or they did it all wrong. Like, it's not about that for me, because I know deep down they're just detached from their selves
Mhm.
and their love for themselves. And probably the love they didn't receive as children either. Like, we're all just walking around with that. And I think that's why I'm so like, I'm not going to let it happen with my kids, because it is intergenerational. Like, you see it passed on. I saw it when my first son was born. It was coming up, it was happening. Like, I was not parenting great. Like, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was reactive parenting instead of conscious parenting. And I'm
Mm.
so grateful for the awareness, because who knows what my life would look like 10 years later, and have to do like damage control. So it is a beautiful unfolding, and to be determined on the outcome, right?
Mhm. Well, here we are in the outcome as it unfolds
Yeah.
before us and
Yeah.
around us and in us. And I'm so happy that you're sharing your journey.
It feels good. This talk was good to kind of get it out there.
And I hear you
Yeah.
speaking often about the spiritual, about faith and your spiritual awareness. Is there more that you would like to say about what spirituality is true for you or where you're at in that opening?
Yeah. I mean, it really started for me with a desire to change careers. I sort of alluded to that before, and I heard the most random thing happened to me. I got like a Facebook Messenger DM from someone I didn't even know. I mean, I'm not kidding you. Never heard of this lady. And she sent me a link to an interview with Wayne Dyer and Esther Hicks. So my journey really started out of a manifestation, law of attraction type of desire, like changing what's going on in my life. Like I want, and it was more materialistic things. Like I want more money, and I want a better career, and I want to feel fulfilled. I want to feel like I have some purpose in my work. And it really quickly evolved into like my life's story. And so I dug much deeper into, A Course in Miracles and Marianne Williamson's work and Gary Zukav. And so I really went deep into some soul work. I've dabbled in past life regression therapy, and I'm a huge fan of Ainsley MacLeod and his work. And then, of course, the intuition work. I realized I was seeking all this information. And then when I found out about a coach near me who was teaching intuition, I was like, I read her book and I was like, wow, this really resonates, because she takes a scientific approach and really modern day analysis of the human world that we live in. And like I said to her, I was like, I don't feel like I need to do so much research. I feel like knowing this and having access to my intuition it's like I'm my own guru now. Like I can just tap into it and I can have questions answered. So that was a huge part of my spiritual development, was just honing in and really acknowledging my intuition, recognizing the body pangs, the energy pangs that I get. Louise Hay was huge for me, especially as it comes to, mind and body and how to heal. Like, I did have a lot of chronic pains here and there. And once you find like the emotional attachment, why they're there, it's like brilliant to me. And it fascinates me on such a level. So then I realized, okay, if I could find a way to do interior design and like spiritual development, like I got to find a way to blend the two, because they both fascinate me. And then I started reading about some feng shui work, and I was like, okay, I think I found it. I think I found it here. So yeah, it's interesting. It started off with just, trying to manifest a different lifestyle. And then it just evolved into just really deep soul work. And I think for the last couple years, this stuff with my family is really brought up, like kind of like that dark night of the soul stuff, right? The things that really keep us down. And I felt like my energy was just very depleted all the time. I was like lacking a lot of joy, and but I was still so consumed with those works. Like I wanted to understand. But then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm happy I'm doing this work, but it's like bringing me down a little bit. So I was like, what did I enjoy when I first started? And it was like Esther Hicks. So I just started re-listening to Esther again. And she gets me like pumped up, like just, I love hearing her speak. And, but it's interesting to hear her now from when I first started, because I listened to her with a different set of ears. So yeah, I think for me, I have to start my day with that material, whether it's books or, a podcast or a YouTube video of just positive affirmation, whatever. It doesn't even have to be affirmations, just positive reading material. That's the way I start my day. So, and of course, meditation, Rain, your specialty.
Yes, as you know, I love meditation. Born and raised with it. That is one of the blessings of my life. I grew up in a spiritual family, and that rings true for me all the way through. It a great asset that I was given.
Oh, I love that. Beautiful. Yeah, I was not. But it is something I'm sharing with my kids as well. So I'm grateful to give that. They have some great breathing techniques and mindfulness to like get them through their little days at school. And I love sharing that. I think children is probably my favorite little students to like share my knowledge and wisdom with, because they're just so receptive to it. And it's like they know. They're like, yeah, duh, just like breathe.
How about we end with some gratitude? What are you grateful for today or any time in your life? What gratitude is present for you?
Oh, that's an easy one. If I did not have my spiritual faith, none of this would be possible. I am grateful for that Facebook DM from a random stranger that opened my world to a whole nother world.
Mm.
I mean, that's truly what I'm grateful for, because none of this would be possible. My healing, how I show up as a parent, how I show up for myself, for my clients, for my husband. I mean, even he's a very quiet man, but he hears me talk and he takes action, but he doesn't talk about it. And I'll just see it. I'm like, oh, look at him, like manifesting things over there and changing his attitude about something. Like I love that just my presence and my being and what I find that I'm passionate about is everybody's receiving it without intentionally putting it out there. So I'm grateful that I have the ability to do that, and I'm excited to share more.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I see this movement of gratitude through you, and I hear it in your voice, and I resonate with it. I'm so grateful for you. Is there anything you want to add before I end the recording?
I don't think so. I just wish everyone out there listening that if you're going through this, to know that nothing, the biggest thing is nothing is your fault. You did nothing to deserve this. And there are people out there that can relate to you. And I think it's so imperative to find those people to help you move through it. Whether it was a parent, a spouse, a brother, that there are a lot of us out there going through it. And I think the more we can be brave to talk about it, the more light will shed on it. And just like anything, with awareness comes healing.
Your light is such a gift.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. It has been a great joy to have your presence here in this podcast. I welcome you to celebrate the joy and wisdom in your life exactly as it is. And I welcome you to feel loved, fully loved, exactly as you are. www.rainelizabeth.org